Tara Bennett for Sci-Fi Wire, and I am so pleased to say today we have Orlando Jones. Hello, sir.
How are you?
So great to see you. So you are in Brian Fuller and Michael Green's new project for Starz, American Gods. So one, I am a huge Pushing Daisies fan. I love that show so much. I got to go to the set when Brian was doing that show. I have a shirt that he gave me, and so you were on that show as one of the Norwegians.
Yes, I was Norwegian.
So that's the last time that you worked with Brian, and
yeah.
Knowing how great that experience was, were you talking to Brian in the meantime? He obviously did Hannibal in between. Were there any conversations about you working with him again?
No, I mean, we follow each other on Twitter, so there was lots of me retweeting or, being a part of the Hannibal fandom, which was a lot of fun. My friend Lawrence Fishburne was on the show and whatnot, so I was a big fan of Hannibal, but I think I was doing Sleepy Hollow, I think, at the time. So, but I'm a huge fan of Brian and Michael's work and a crazy fan of Neil. And Neil's work as well. So we didn't chat, and then suddenly I got a phone call going, so, you want to talk about Mr. Nancy? And I was like, is this a joke? Like, of course I want to talk about Mr. Nancy.
So I wanted to ask, was that always their intention? Did they came to you with Mr. Nancy? Because obviously it's a huge ensemble of God characters. Everybody that you meet along the way could be a great character to play.
Sure.
But Mr. Nancy was the one that they initially said, this is what we're thinking of for you?
That's what they called about.
Nice.
So, it's one of those crazy things. But it had already sort of started in fandom years before, where there was a bunch of, who should play Mr. Nancy.
Yeah, there was the fan casting, and they had mentioned you quite a bit.
Yes, so that that's how I met and connected with Neil, again, on Twitter. So I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I've been reading about, Anansi since I was a little kid.
Yeah. So when let's talk about your first exposure. You read Anansi Boys first, right?
I did, but that's not how I knew Anansi.
Okay.
I knew Anansi because Anansi's a children's story about the spider who steals all the stories from the sky god, because the sky god asks him to get, he asks him to trap, I think, a leopard, a lion, and like an elephant, and the sky god's like, this tiny spider isn't going to be able to capture these animals, this is never going to work. And so Anansi uses his trickery to do so, takes those animals, and then gets all the stories of the world from the sky god, and then spreads stories around the four corners of the world. That's how I knew Anansi.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, you should check out Anansi Boys, and I was like, wow, who's writing about the African spider god? Oh, this British dude, this is amazing. And so I started reading Anansi Boys, and I was like, I got to read American Gods before I read this, so I kind of doubled back and then became a crazy Neil Gaiman fan and started following him around.
Man, so this is like super full circle for you.
Oh yeah, totally.
When you were reading those books, was that when you read his version of Anansi and what he was doing, is that who you kind of fan cast yourself as?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mr. Nancy, he's awesome.
He is
incredible. His cunning, his trickery. I mean, I'm a big fan of grift movies in general. Like, The Grift is one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
I love cons. I like the nature of them. I like what they're up to. I mean, back to The Sting. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with that particular character and thought, man, this would be so much fun if they ever made it. But I didn't imagine it would really circle back around this way.
It's so incredible. So when you are looking at the introduction for your character, I wanted to talk a little bit about what were some of the initial conversations that you had with Brian and Michael about how you felt you wanted him to look, how you wanted to present yourself with him, because he is so distinct, and we won't spoil anything, but just in terms of how he comes into the world.
It's an interesting scene because it starts on a slave ship. So you imagine what the Middle Passage must have felt like. How fearful that must have been to be shackled and chained in a ship, trying to figure out where you're going and not really understanding what's happening to you, except it's not going to be good. You know that much.
Right.
I really felt like the colors of the Ashanti people, particularly purple, which is the color of royalty, was really something I wanted. And I wanted, African Prince, because he is a character rooted in African culture, particularly Ghanaian culture. So I had hoped for that. But frankly, Brian and Michael were way into it, as was Neil. So I didn't say anything that they hadn't thought of already. They were like, yes, absolutely, that. Of course, let's do that.
Nice.
And then Sudamar, our costume designer, who's phenomenal, that, you know, that's really her work along with Bryan and Michael. They really kind of put that together. I stepped into it. And they gave me my purple. So that's all I'll claim.
It's so amazing. And what was the kind of before or after costume design versus Spider? Because you and the Spider, you know, your aesthetic matches the color scheme. And so did you get to see that before your final costuming was done? Did they want to make sure that, you know, they showed you a picture of it so that you could see what that, how that was going to work out together in tandem?
Absolutely. You know, Michael and Bryan are really, really interesting collaborators. They kind of open the process up a lot and really invite you into it. So we were looking at all these different spiders to see which one, but there was one in particular that just had this hair and kind of jowls, and I was like, I love this guy, and he was different colors, and so I really liked how colorful he was, because again, I thought it sort of spoke to the culture and to the use of color that's so much a part of African street fashion, and I was like, can we do this? And Bryan was like, this is the one, and we all sort of agreed, but you know, they chose the perfect spiders.